G'day, welcome to another episode of Built by Dan and yet another installment in my GT40 kit build series. In today's episode, I'm going to be installing a number of accessories onto my Gen 3 Coyote crate engine, including a low profile oil pan, air conditioning compressor, alternator, and offtakes for a remote oil cooler and remote oil filter. Once I've fitted them off, I want to test fit the engine back in the chassis to check my clearances from my coolant reservoirs and fuel system accessories that I installed in the last couple of episodes. Before I make a start on the work I have planned for today, I want to take a moment to thank Surfshark for sponsoring this episode. For those who haven't heard of Surfshark, they're a VPN provider. What is a VPN? VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. A VPN hides or masks your location whilst using the internet. It does this by making your device appear to be in a virtual location, which could be anywhere in the world. Not only does a VPN hide your physical location, it also encrypts your data, making surfing the internet more secure. This is particularly important given the amount of online shopping and banking we all do these days, constantly giving out our personal data and banking details. Now let's look at some of the features and benefits of a VPN that I use regularly and no doubt would benefit many of you too. A single Surfshark subscription can be shared across an unlimited number of devices, with multiple devices able to be used concurrently. Surfshark offer an application for PCs, gaming consoles, smart TVs, tablets and mobile devices, so you can be protected regardless of the device you use to access the internet. Activating Surfshark VPN on your device is as simple as downloading and opening the app, logging in with your username and password, and tapping the Quick Connect button. You'll only need to log in the first time you use the app on each device. You can then select other settings such as connecting to the fastest location or selecting a specific location or country. If you're like me and sourcing lots of parts for your project car build from overseas suppliers, Surfshark VPN can help you avoid pricing discrimination from websites who may increase their prices if they identify you are accessing their website from an overseas location. Simply change your Surfshark VPN to the country in which the website is based and access the same pricing available to those located locally in that country. For those of you that sign up to Surfshark via the link in the description below and use my promo code BUILTBYDAN when you check out, you'll unlock the best deal currently available online, being 85% off and an extra 3 months for free. So if you're in the market for a VPN, be sure to check out Surfshark in the link below. They offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so why not give it a go and see how a Surfshark VPN can improve your security online. Alright, so I've got all my parts unboxed, laid out, ready to assemble. You'll note there's something missing there, the oil pan. I did just quickly want to double check to make sure that the oil pan was in fact going to fit between the chassis rails, and sure enough, it doesn't. So you can see on this side, I've basically got that welded in bung for the temperature sensor sitting hard up against the side of that chassis rail, and the cap or the plug is screwed in and sitting on top of the rail. If I move to the other side, you can see there I've got probably 4 or 5 mil between the face of the bung and the chassis rail, but I can't actually screw that plug in any further. Interestingly, it was the same deal with the one up the top end of the oil pan. I'm just not able to screw them in any further than what you can see there. So there's only a few threads that are actually fitting in. Doesn't matter what I did to clean them. I'm thinking maybe that bung might have distorted when it's been welded in or something. I don't know, it's my best guess. So there's no point me trying to fit this oil pan up to the engine, because ultimately I want to place the engine back in the chassis here and check the clearance, particularly from this radiator hose and the fuel pump and filter. I also want to check the clearance for the remote oil cooler and filter fitting against this rail. I think the only option I've got is to trim this oil pan. Now this is an oil pan from a manufacturer that was recommended in the build manual, so I haven't just gone rogue and ordered whatever.
I'll either need to trim down each side of this oil pan to get some additional clearance, or potentially just cut out those welded in bungs, so just remove that requirement for the plug altogether and just make that a flush side. I'm not sure if there's anything else that I would need them for. I have a drain plug at the back here. Surely one would be enough. I can pick up oil temperature from elsewhere on the engine. So I think that's probably going to be my only option, or only two options that I'd need to decide between. Remove the two bungs and literally have a couple of mil either side, although actually it's probably going to be about 5 mil either side, or cut up the oil pan. I'd have to find someone that can do that. That's not something that I'd be confident in trying to take on myself. I have only just recently taught myself how to weld, so I would not be looking to weld up an oil pan that needs to be fully sealed so that it doesn't leak. Anyway, the oil pan saga continues. First I had the wrong pan, now I've got the correct low profile pan and it doesn't fit. So let's jump back across to fitting up the rest of these accessories. I think I'm going to start with the air conditioning compressor. I'm not going to fit the belt because it is a sort of a tensioned fit belt. It's a tight belt, it doesn't have a tensioner. It's got to be forced on there, and I don't want to leave the compressor on there just yet because again, I just need to check for clearances. When I go to do the final assembly of the engine to get it up and running, I'll then look to get that belt fitted. I will fit up the serpentine belt though. There's a tensioner pulley, a replacement pulley for this existing pulley that comes on the crate engine. I don't quite know why that needs to be replaced. Maybe someone can fill me in the comments below. My best guess is that this pulley might be for a sort of a factory fitment setup, whereas if you go to install the aftermarket or the Ford Performance alternator kit, it requires a slightly different pulley. There's really not much in it. I can't really pick any difference in size or anything. The alternator itself has 2 bolts holding it in place, and then I have the thermostatically adjusted sandwich plate for the remote oil cooler, and then the takeoff piece or plate for the remote oil filter. Okay, so fairly straightforward for the air conditioning compressor. There are, get this around the right way. There are 3 mounting points. 2 of them have locating pins to locate in the block. So I'm just going to hold that up there and try and thread a couple of these bolts in. Try and take some of this weight. So that's it for the air conditioning compressor, simply those 3 bolts. As I said, the belt goes around here, it goes around the inside run on the main pulley. So ideally you would fit the air conditioning belt before you fit the serpentine belt. However, given that this is just a test fit, the unit itself is enough for me to check my clearances. So I'll jump on over the other side and get stuck into, I think I'll start from the bottom, work my way up. So I'll start with the oil cooler takeoff and the oil filter takeoff plate. First off, I want to fit off the sandwich plate for the remote oil cooler. So basically the same sort of setup as the factory unit where they had the large oil cooler sitting there and then the filter sat on the outside of that. So this has the 2 takeoffs, the inlet outlet and the thermostatic controller here. It has a rubber seal there, and I think for now, just based on space and where I think things might run, I'm probably just going to run them to the front, and then I'll look at a 90-degree fitting that can come off and run to my remote cooler. So it does come with an extended I suppose, oil filter bolt. So that is designed to pass through the plate and screw into the block. And then on the other side, it has the additional thread, either for your filter to screw directly on or for the takeoff plate. So as simple as that. You would obviously torque that up if it was your final fitment. Now, the plate for the remote oil filter has a nut and a spring clip on the inside just to hold that nut in place. So it simply just screws on the outside. Now that sets really good in terms of sitting sort of ideally parallel with the chassis rail. I'm hoping that will give me enough clearance for the rail to sit under here. I am still a little bit concerned as to how low that might actually sit. So there'd be an inlet and an outlet from the end here, which I think should sit on the outside of the rail. I'm expecting the rail to sort of sit under here somewhere pretty close to this fitting. So hopefully I won't have to remove that before I can even fit the engine. So that's the remote oil cooler, remote oil filter takeoff on the engine. Now I'm going to move on to the alternator and the pulleys. I'm going to start with the alternator itself. It simply has two mounting points. The lower one down here, it's basically just sandwiched between the outside and inside of the alternator casing itself, and there's a threaded section in the back there, so that just sits either side of the block. And then for the top one, it's just the front casing and then there's a threaded section here on the block. So before I go too far, so with that top stud fitted off, I can now hang the alternator off there. I'm just going to put the nut on just so it doesn't fall off. And then I can feed the other bolt through. Alright, so it's as simple as that. They are pretty much just a bolt-on. There was a little nut that goes on the terminal on the side of the alternator unit here. That's for connecting the lead on the main harness. So when I get around to fitting that, I can fit that on, but I've just put the nut on there for now so that I don't lose it. Next up, I think I'm going to replace this pulley with the replacement that comes in the kit. As I said, I really can't see what the difference is. To me, they seem to be exactly the same size. So we'll see how we go. I'll follow the directions and replace it anyway. Okay, that's all fitted off. Last but not least is my tensioner pulley, in fact probably of most importance. So it's just a single bolt. There is a locating pin on the back that just sits in there so that it doesn't turn when you go to apply that tension to adjust that. So that's now everything fitted off. All that's left is the serpentine belt. Now I've got to try and remember how this actually ran. I think I better go find a diagram. So that's how it sits. I just need to grab socket and adjust this tensioner pulley so that I can slide that belt on. Okay, everything feels like it's seated properly. And that's that. So I'll just quickly show you how they all look a bit closer, all fitted up. You can see the 3 bolts there. The belt would run around on the inside of the main pulley. I've just got the replacement pulley, the tensioner pulley, and then the alternator fitted up here. And it's really hard to see under here, but there's my oil cooler and oil filter, remote oil cooler and remote oil filter takeoff, I should say. So with all that sorted, I'm now going to get everything prepped, get my engine hoist sorted, clear out this oil pan from the engine bay, and look to drop that engine back in. I'll have to fit the engine mounts off once it's almost in position. Okay, so I'm going to take the same approach to installing the engine as I did last time. The only difference is I've got just a ratchet strap trying to support this driver's side front of the engine because the engine lifting points are quite awkward and it tends to tilt the engine. It made it quite difficult last time. Fingers crossed this is a slightly easier process, having already done it once. It's quite a tight fit. I'm barely clearing the back of the engine on these raised suspension mounts. Alright, I think it's time to get my engine mounts fitted off before I lower that too much further. Definitely need to start levelling that out once I get those engine mounts on. Right. I think we're good to lower that down a bit more now that it's levelled out. That should push it back a little bit further still. Okay. So that's sitting down on the engine mounts now. I will just need to get the adapter plate sorted and get that bolted up to the engine to be able to support the front of the engine here, or the back of the engine I should say. Okay, so I've quickly fitted off my adapter plate both to the engine as well as to the chassis. So that's now holding the engine in place and it's pulled it back exactly where it needs to sit. So now I can assess the clearance that I have, or lack of clearance potentially, at the front. Disconnect the engine crane and then I'll be able to shift the whole vehicle forward. Alright, so with the engine fitted up, let's have a look at how we're going with our clearances. So far so good on this side. I've got some clearance there from the chassis to the remote oil filter takeoff. Plenty of space around the alternator, which is good. Coming around to this side, I've got the inlet for the coolant. Plenty of clearance there, but we'll have to have a look on the other side to see how that's going to go. Down the bottom here, you can see we get close with the air conditioning compressor to the engine mount, but it's not too bad. By the time that bolt's done up, that'll also push through. Shouldn't be an issue. And you can see we do get pretty close with our coolant tube through here along the front of the compressor pulley. So jump inside the cabin and have a look. So it's close, but we do actually have some clearance. Probably be nice if we had a little bit more, but that's okay. I can work on that. I can increase the length of this tube a little bit, just removing some of it. I did feed quite a bit into the silicone hoses at each end so that I had some adjustability if I needed to make it that little bit longer. It'd just be nice to tuck it back up under the filter a little bit more. Somewhere in there would be nice. But one issue that I do have is this silicone hose is hitting the main pulley, which I'm kind of surprised about. I would have thought there would be clearance there. I can't really push that in anymore. I might actually have to cut the silicone back a little bit so that it moves the whole thing forward away from that pulley. And good to see that our brake pressure switch has enough clearance in front of the pulley, and it also sits sort of in that central sort of recess, so quite comfortable there. I can get some wires out and connect that up. I don't think there's anything else there that's of concern. So all in all, not too bad. Improve some of those clearances a little bit and it should be good to go. Just have a quick look here from the passenger side. As you can see, plenty of clearance around the alternator there. The belts. I probably will need to rotate the silicone hose down there, that 90 degree that's not fitted off to anything. It will have a hose that comes around and connects up to this point here, but at the moment it kind of looks like it's angling up towards the belt. So I just need to try and angle that down and keep it running straight along the top of that chassis tube. That you can see there just where the top silicone 90 degree bend is hitting the pulley. And just another view of the clearance there from the coolant hose to the air conditioning pulley. Alright, so before I wrap up today's episode, I'll just quickly run you through what I've been thinking about off camera as to how I might solve a couple of these clearance issues. And then I'll give you a quick sneak peek as to what I'll be looking to achieve in the next episode. So first off, you can see here, this is the first time the entire chassis structure, let's call it, has been together in a very long time. So I've reinstalled these rear stay tubes. I've got this top brace across the, let's call them suspension towers. So everything fits nicely with those components fitted back off. I only did this just to give me a bit of an idea. One, obviously I still need a flipper manifold, and I might actually even try that again now with this top brace fitted, just to see how much space I have for the intake tube, let's call it, or the air intake to come out. I've got a feeling I may actually need to cut some of this plate to be able to accommodate that. It also gives me an idea of how much room I have for an exhaust. I'm quite comfortable that I'll be able to get exhaust tubes through this section here, and obviously I'll have to try and fit a muffler on top of the transaxle. A couple of other things. My remote oil filter. So this is the takeoff plate. I've sort of just roughly assembled that. Inlet and outlets on the same side there. I was thinking about installing it somewhere down here, just below those mounting points for the shear plate for the rear roll bar stays. I think it keeps it in a fairly accessible area. The exhaust will need to fit in here, and hopefully a catalytic converter as well. But until I can get my hands on those catalytic converters, I won't know how much space I have. So for now, I think this is where I would like to have the oil filter mounted. The other thing I had to resolve once the engine was fitted was the fuel regulator. There really isn't much room on that rear firewall. I'm actually thinking it may just need to mount on this top tube. I just don't know how that integrates with the rear clamshell. So I haven't had this rear clamshell fitted up to the vehicle since the kit was delivered, and I removed it to start the assembly on the bare chassis. So maybe in a future episode I need to get that clamshell fitted up again. Given the delays in trying to resolve the notching of this rear tube so that I can actually fit my Graziano transaxle into the chassis, I may just fit the rear support plate that I've just had sitting off to the side here. I might fit that back up just so I can get the rear clamshell fitted and see how it all works now that I've got the engine fitted. I just want to get a feel for clearances, particularly around sort of the fuel rails, the intake manifold, as well as if I was to run a Gen 3 intake, these vacuum pumps. One other thing I've been thinking is I may have to buy some more Dash 12 AN fuel line. I've just disconnected the cross flow or the cross siphon balancing tube, whatever we want to call it. So you can see where it was screwed in just down here. It's now sitting out there. I have just tucked it behind those 90-degree silicon elbows. I think that's going to be a better solution for it. One, I'm not fighting with the braided line sitting on top of the silicon and potentially wearing through it. And I think this gives me a little bit more space to run it around, and I should have enough clearance between the back of that 90-degree elbow and the front of the oil pan. When I jump around to the other side of the vehicle, it'll also give me better access to the valve to separate the two fuel tanks. At the moment, it's sitting down under this radiator tube, which is going to get hot. So if I ever had to try and isolate it for some reason, it's not the easiest to get under here and turn that off. So if I had it curving out a bit further, this would sort of come on more of an angle, and the valve would likely sit somewhere here and be a bit clear of both the air conditioning compressor and the radiator hose. I think overall it would provide a much better solution if I can get that to work. So I think I'll go and buy another meter of hose and see what I can play around with there. All right, last two things. I need to connect up my engine management somewhere. I was thinking inside the cab, just tucked down here, but my concern is the available length of the wiring loom to actually reach down there. So this main engine harness won't actually reach that far. So I was thinking or wondering whether I might be able to find a convenient place to locate it down here. I don't need these holes that go through to the fuel tank. It seems to be an oversight because there is no connection into the tank. So I can literally cover over this entire piece here. And I think that might be an ideal location if I was to keep it in the engine bay. I think another day I'll pull out that wiring harness and just get a feel for how long the different cables on that harness are and how far I'm going to be able to stretch everything to get it to connect up if it was to be located in that position. The other thing is, if I have my remote oil filter mounted on the side here, I still need to find somewhere for my remote oil cooler. I was thinking mounted somewhere here, and I have seen it on a number of other kits. Unfortunately, I've got this rear stay that becomes a bit of an issue on mine, but if I could find some way to mount a bracket and have an oil cooler sort of standing upright, I think that would be an ideal location, because I then have the side vent coming in to provide fresh air to cool that oil. Again, I would just need to get that rear clamshell fitted up so I know where it's actually ducting that air to and whether I actually have space, or does that duct actually consume all of this area that I'm hoping to locate a cooler. All right, so that's it for today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss future updates. Hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. Always open to suggestions or recommendations from those of you who may be able to see things from a different perspective or have more experience than I do with this type of thing. Now, for next episode, I'm going to start back on the interior. I know I said it a couple of episodes ago that I want to make a start on getting the dash fitted, so that's exactly what I'm going to be doing next episode. I'm not sure how I'm going to tackle that, because at the moment I'm concerned the dash sits too high and it doesn't actually line up with the profile on the door. So as you can see, I've already taped some packers on to try and get a consistent spacing. I'll get that fitted up next episode. It's going to be a bit of a mess. It's going to require the roof spider to be taken on and off a few times so that I can get the dash to sit in far enough until I can get the height correct. But I'm really looking forward to it. It'll definitely give a new lease of life to the interior. Alright, so we'll quickly grab the dash and a quick sneak peek as to what I'm contending with here. Is just over here. You can see the gap between the vertical section and then the gap between the top corner that angles back into the cab. There's a significant gap between the profile on the door and the profile on the dash, which makes me think the dash needs to be lowered or trimmed down in terms of trimming these legs that go down onto the sill. But the catch there is that I'm potentially limited as to how low I can drop my steering column without it sitting up here in the middle of my Speedo or tacho. So, problem for next episode, be sure to tune in to see how I solve it.